Today I'd like to welcome Dr. Wayne Mackintosh. Should I say kia ora, Wayne? Thank you for joining us. Wayne is the director of the OER Foundation, and he's headquartered at the Open Polytechnic in New Zealand down there in Dunedin. And Wayne also coordinated the establishment of the OER University, which at the time when I was working at USQ, we were one of the early partners within the OER University. They're still powering on with that. He's also, the OER University is kind of a partnership of universities who want to have a kind of keen interest in widening access and participation in higher education, particularly for those people who find it difficult to access higher education. So Wayne also holds UNESCO and ICDE chair for OER at the Open Polytechnic and through the OER Foundation. So it's a very great pleasure to welcome you today, Wayne. And just kick off with the first question. OER, or open education, I should say, not OER, but open education means different things to different people. What does it mean for you?
Kia ora, Michael, and thanks for the opportunity to join the conversation. For us here at the OER Foundation, we follow UNESCO's definition of open educational resources, which are learning materials that have been dedicated to the public domain or released under an open copyright license to provide free access plus permissions to reuse, adapt, and modify those materials. Speaking personally, OER for me is a return to the core traditions of the academy, which is to share knowledge freely.
Cool. And what about open education more generally? I mean, that's OER. What about open education more generally?
Well, for us at the OER Foundation, open education is a broad concept. I think a simple way of explaining it is that we are working to open source education in all its components. So we use OER to assemble open online courses, to provide open and unrestricted access. And for us, open means the ability for learners to access all course materials without the requirement to register a password. And that is actually particularly interesting for a number of learning communities. Consider, for example, first in family Indigenous learners who may want to trial higher education for the first time, and having this open philosophy provides opportunities for these learners to be able to succeed anonymously. And so open education for us is the whole ecosystem of which OER is part. So for example, all our technical infrastructure at the OERU is based on open source software, which means that any institution in the world can replicate our infrastructure if they want to. There are aspects of open pedagogy, for example, where learners co-contribute to the creation of learning materials in building that ecosystem. So the concept of open education for us is a broad umbrella term that has multiple components: OER, open licensing, open source, open policies, and open business models, for example.
Yeah. So one normally thinks of open education helping people like in Africa or India or, what about Western universities and, in those in developed countries? What role can they play in this?
I think Western universities have a very significant role to play in this space. From the perspective of the OERU, we were established to address the huge challenge of the vast majority of learners in the developing world who qualify for seats in tertiary education, but who will not have the privilege of attending a university, either because of cost restrictions or perhaps a lack of provision in their home countries. I mean, these numbers are conservatively estimated. Learners falling into this category would be more than 100 million learners. And so all our publicly funded institutions in the Western world, most have a community service mission. And as publicly funded institutions, our partner institutions assemble 1 or 2 courses based on OER, which is made available for the planet in effect. So for a very small contribution, we can make a big difference. We also, within the OER Foundation, as a charitable organization, we have an initiative called the OERU Outreach Partners Initiative, where we provide membership benefits to institutions in the developing world free of charge. And in this way, our institutions in the Western world can actually collaborate meaningfully in helping institutions around the world. So the OERU Outreach Partnership Initiative was launched roughly about a year or so ago. And we have partners now from Namibia, Botswana, Zambia, India, Pakistan, and Nepal. And it's growing at a steady pace. And through the network, we are aiming to support twinning initiatives where institutions in the Western world can partner with our OERU outreach partners. But it's a win-win situation because there's also the value of South-North knowledge transfer, which for us is particularly important.
Yeah.
So I mean, in summary, the OERU model, it's smart philanthropy because our partner institutions learn quite a bit by engaging in this open design and development process, while helping learners in different parts of the world. But the lessons we learn can be plowed back into the design of our own programs locally. Okay. So it's really a win-win relationship. Our aim is not to disrupt the university sector in any way. It's about building a parallel learning universe, which is true to our missions of widening access to learning.
Yeah, cool. So for some Western universities, that means a bit of a change in mindset, so that it becomes front of mind, not an afterthought. What would be some of the things that you would think an institution like mine, how do we change that mindset?
By dipping one's toes in the water, by taking small steps, the benefits are huge. I mean, the OERU is designed in such a way that the risks or exposure for any one institution are very low. But the collective benefits are huge. I mean, for example, we have developed a transnational micro-credentialing ecosystem that facilitates international credit transfer for stackable micro-credentials based entirely on OER. And there's considerable tacit knowledge that we have gained through this process of working together to achieve these milestones. And I think that's the strength of the OERU model. The rigor of our planning using a low-cost, low-risk, but high-impact innovation strategy has delivered dividends in developing a functioning model of the vision we had when we established this almost 10 years ago.
Okay, so if an institution wanted to put up a course through the OERU, how does that institution develops the course? Does it look after the assessments, for example, done in that course?
So how the model works, it's a disaggregated service provision model. So courses are designed for independent self-study, and for those of us that have been engaged in open distance and online learning for a while are familiar with the design of high quality asynchronous learning materials. In an ideal OER use scenario, we try our best to assemble courses based from existing OER rather than inventing new wheels. But of course, in certain cases, institutions may choose to actually develop these resources and release them under open licenses. And so the OERU hosts our courses on an open infrastructure. We don't use a learning management system at all. We are supporting learners to learn how to learn on the internet using the distributed tools of the internet. If a learner feels they are ready for assessment, they will present themselves at one of the OERU partner institutions who provides assessment services for that particular course. And then we have a system of bilateral credit transfer agreements between OERU partners that are providing assessment services for transcript credit towards pre-approved qualifications. Yeah. So that's kind of how the system works. It's an opt-in model in terms of who decides to provide assessment services and how that credit is recognized across the network. And that has worked particularly well for us. And innovation is not always easy in the traditional university context, and I think the approach that we took was to design this system in a way that can function within existing assessment policies at our partner institutions has been a cornerstone for our success. So we have not tried to innovate on too many fronts simultaneously. So effectively really just, 2 or 3 innovations, one building courses entirely from OER, assembling them as micro courses to overcome the challenges of different course sizes in different parts of the world. And having this micro course model has enabled us to innovate on the front of micro credentials. But we haven't tampered with assessment policies or the quality standards that you would expect to find at university or institutions of higher learning.
Okay, cool. Very interesting. Any last inspirational thoughts?
I'm not so sure if it's inspirational, but I think in a post-COVID world, our publicly funded institutions have a number of big challenges facing us, particularly in the area of thinking about more sustainable ways of providing education. And in that regard, OER is a sustainable and a renewable resource. And I think that the OERU model, which is effectively a networked model, working together, we are going to be able to achieve more sustainable education than working alone.
Well, that's great. So thanks so much for sparing a few minutes to speak with us, Wayne. We really do appreciate it. So,
Kia ora, Michael, and thank you for the opportunity and widening the extent of these conversations to the non-profit sector.
Yeah, excellent. See you again.